How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this week's Q&A video. Like every other video, if you want a chance at one of your questions potentially being answered, make sure you drop a comment down below with your question, and I'll either try to address it in the comments, make a video dedicated to that question in a different video, or answer it in next week's Q&A. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with question number one of this week, and is how do I feel about the reliability of Hondas and Acuras now versus maybe a decade or two ago? And that's kind of a tricky question. Obviously, I post a lot of negative stuff or a lot of common issues on them. And not that there weren't any common issues, 10, 20 years ago, although I wasn't really broadcasting them the way I am today. So, there's that. But with that being said, the more stuff every manufacturer starts adding and keeps adding to their cars, just simply the more stuff that's going to break. And I know prices of cars have gone up considerably, but considering everything that we're adding in the last couple years, the price really hasn't increased that much, and I think it takes a toll on the quality at some point. All these manufacturers are kind of competing with each other to be the head honcho, the best seller, best miles per gallon, best price, etc., whatever, fill in the blank. And they're really going at each other's throats, and it's kind of compromising quality to an extent. So obviously there's a lot of 1.5T head gasket issues at this time. But when I started with Honda back in 2008, we were doing head gaskets on the D17s. Not as much, but a decent amount of them as well. So we were also doing 2 to 3 transmissions a day on the V6, Accords, Odysseys, Pilots, 4-cylinder Accords as well, some Civics. So transmissions were way more problematic back then than they are now. So obviously, we're doing a lot of head gaskets now. Back then, we were doing a lot of transmissions. We got some quality control stuff going on, especially with, some of the Fokker stuff found on Odysseys, Pilots, Passports, etc. Some on the Acura side as well. So overall, considering everything that's been added to these cars, I don't think the quality is that much better or worse. But obviously there are issues, and again, the more stuff they add to the cars, the more problems that we will see in each individual car, because obviously there's just more things to break. So hopefully that answers that question for you guys. And I am going to be doing a video on my personal opinion on the worst to the best Honda made. And I'll have that obviously in a dedicated video somewhere along the line. All right, so the next question is, do I use any fuel additives in my personal vehicles, or any special cleaning that I do? And I do not. I feel like it's just more important to use high quality fuel, so high octane, and from a reputable station. So ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, Sunoco, stuff like that. On my car, on my TLX, I use Sunoco 94. On the wife's Pilot, I use Exxon 93 or, BP or anything of that. Try to avoid like the local gas stations, the mom and pop gas stations. Not to pick on them, but I feel like maybe they're just not as regulated. And we see a lot of contaminated fuels, typically from those smaller gas stations. Again, not to pick on them, but that's just what I see. And I just try to use a reputable and the same gas station. If there's ever an issue with some water in there or anything like that, they know I go there all the time. And, they can't say, well, maybe got it somewhere else, or whatever the case may be. But again, to answer your question, I don't use any additives. I feel like it's a lot more important to just use better quality fuel and the highest octane that you can find. And that's going to be the best as far as keeping your injectors clean. Obviously, that's not going to solve any carbon buildup issues, but for the sake of keeping your injectors clean and avoiding pre-detonation, that's going to be your best bet. All right, so the next question is, what are my thoughts on oil catch cans? And I think they are relatively a good idea, especially on these direct injection engines, which typically, if you have any newer type of car, you're going to have a GDI engine, and obviously that comes with a lot of carbon buildup, and in addition to consistent oil changes, top tier fuel, and an addition of oil catch can, you could definitely reduce some of that carbon buildup. Although a lot of times I do see post-math leaks, which could cause other issues, some performance issues. And obviously, if there's any leaks of any sort in a PCV system, you don't want that happening. But if it's a good system, if everything's nice and tight and snug, I think it's a good idea. It doesn't hurt. And I think if you're considering getting one, then you most likely should. All right, so the next question is, in what sequence should you apply your parking brake? This person specifically had the question towards the ZF9 transmission, although I think this should apply to every transmission. And essentially, you're going to want to come to wherever you're parking and obviously keep your foot on the brake and apply the parking brake then. So like this, there's no pressure on that parking gear, and you won't cause some premature damage with that. If you ever notice that you park on a hill and you don't apply the parking brake and you go to take it out of gear, whether it's a selector or a push button like we have a lot in the newer cars, there's a big thump or clunk coming out of that gear, and that's because it's under a lot of pressure. So over time, I can see that causing damage. So again, you're gonna come to your stop, you're gonna hold the brake pedal, apply your parking brake, put the car in park, turn off the car. When you start the car, you're gonna start the car, hold the brake, and then release the parking brake and then put it into drive at that point. That's how I would do it, and that's how I think it should be done. I've never seen any of that kind of damage, anything like that causing damage to the transmission, although you just want to try to avoid that. Just, you never know, and that would be the way I would do it, and hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, guys, so this is the last question for this week's Q&A, and if you want one of your questions potentially answered, make sure you drop a comment down below. If I didn't get to your question this week, there's a good possibility that I'm working either on a dedicated video, or I just didn't have the space for it, or I'll address it in next week's video. But make sure, if I haven't answered your question, drop the question again. I don't want to miss it. I want to try to be fair to everyone and answer everybody's question. If I could, make a video out of it and just give you guys some content. So once again, let's get to the last question. And should you address broken spring perches and strut mounts, dust boots, and bump stops if they are broken? Then the question is, the answer is absolutely, especially if you're in the 60s or 70,000 miles. There's a good chance that that strut or shock will last way into the 150,000 miles. So there's no reason you should chance something being damaged because you didn't want to spend the money on that broken small section of the suspension component. And this applies to all the suspension. So anytime something is broken or damaged, it puts extra wear and tear on something else. So you want to try to address that as quickly as possible. Obviously, if you notice some broken bump stops or a spring perch or something, or a strut mount, and you have 100, 120, 130,000 miles, then it's probably the time to do, that broken piece along with the shock or strut, depending on the suspension setup. But once again, just play it by ear. Make a call, and if it's got a lot of miles, then replace everything. If not, then if it's on the lower end of the mileage, just out of warranty, go ahead and do it. Obviously, if it's covered under warranty, then Honda or Acura should be covering that part and shouldn't be coming out of your pocket at all. But yeah, anytime there's any broken suspension or worn out suspension components, you're going to want to replace those. You don't want any premature tire damage as well. So there's a lot to go with that. But again, use your judgment and try to make the best call for that specific scenario. So I'm gonna end the video right here, guys, and I hope you guys learned something. Once again, make sure you guys keep dropping those comments, and I'll keep making these videos, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.